So the next section we're going to talk about is redirection, flash, and session, and learn more about conventions. So when you receive the form, I told you that you get this params hash, right? And one thing we can actually do is use the debugger, the Ruby debugger, to see that params. So I'm actually going to do that. I have a simplified version of part of the Rotten Potatoes movie app. And as you can see, there's a new controller method that actually doesn't do anything in this case. It just renders the new view. And then we have a create. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to instrument the create so that once I'm inside create, I'll hit a breakpoint in the Ruby debugger, and then we can do we could look at whatever data we want. So that's really easy. All you have to do is write debugger there. And then if we start our server properly using the -- debugger option, we should have a So I'm just going to go directly to that URL, and we'll put in everybody's favorite movie that should have been rated R, but was actually PG-13. And it came out sometime last year. I don't know. If somebody knows the release date, it's not. So now when I click Save Changes, what's going to happen is that our application actually hit a breakpoint. So the browser is waiting for that request to finish. However, if we go into our terminal, if you look at the very bottom, we have a debugger prompt. And now I can do things like look at params. So let's look at params. And you'll see params is actually a hash with lots of things in it. For example, the first thing is checking to see whether the encoding is UTF-8. This is basically because for internationalization purposes. We also have an authenticity token. You're going to learn a lot about authentication in later lectures. But the important thing is because of the way we set up that form, we have a movie hash, and it's got movie, and then there's title, new moon, rating PG-13, and then the release date is this kind of weird format. There's release date 1i, release date 2i, and release date 3i. And the reason that is because we used a date form helper to produce the date form tag there, and now Rails is using this convention to basically put it in a format that can go into the model directly. So if you look at our controller code for the create action, all I'm doing here is I'm actually just calling movie.create with that params hash, and it'll have the correct format. It'll figure out the date, all that stuff. We don't have to worry about it. The next thing you'll see is that I'm actually redirecting to the movie path. This is a convention. Usually when you do a create action, you go back to the list of all the movies. And so I'm redirecting back to there. So I can actually now go into my debugger, and you'll notice the browser is still waiting for that request, and I can just tell it to continue, and the request will go through, and we've got our new movie with the date we put in and the URL set properly. So this is just reiterating what I just said. basically, we want to do this convention because it makes it really easy to use active record models without having to parse things in some weird way. You just pass the hash to active record, and it'll automatically take care of doing that translation for fields. So by convention, we want to redirect the user to a useful page. And we want to do that redirection based on the results of the create action. So if there was some kind of error, for example, the user left the movie field, the movie name field blank, we might want to do something like redirect back to the new movie form with maybe a notice that says, you didn't enter a movie name. If it's successful, we usually want to go back to the list of movies. Doesn't really make sense just to go back to that form with those fields filled in because it's not really clear what you would want to, what more you would want to do with the movie after it's added in. So now you saw the redirect to in our controller code, right? Now remember, redirect triggers a whole new request. So how are we going to let the user know what happened and why we redirected them, right? The reason why we have to worry about this is, remember that HTTP is a stateless protocol, right? So when we do a redirect, we're losing all of the state that we had before. So Rails provides an abstraction for this. There's something called the flash, and it looks like a hash, or as you say in Ruby, it quacks like a hash. It implements all the methods of a hash. You can add stuff to it or whatever, and it persists until the end of the next request. And Flash's total purpose, despite its sharing a name with a really buggy and crash-worthy runtime, is that it's for flashing things on the screen in the next request. And by convention, you want to do notice for something that's information and warning for something that's errors. What this really does is then in your view, you can pull out the flash notice or request, and you can show it, maybe in green if it's a notice or red if it's, an error. Also, I should say that you can actually put other keys. You could put any other key you wanted. Remember, this quacks like a hash. So you could put flash foo, and then you'd be responsible for, in your view, actually getting the text out of flash foo. That would work fine too. There's also the session hash, and the session hash, unlike flash, is a hash that persists forever. And I say forever in quotes because there are certain things that can actually eliminate the session hash. For example, you can reset the session, you can delete keys from it, and so on. The default storage mode for Flash and sessions is using cookies. And that's where the statefulness comes in, right? HTTP is stateless. However, browsers implement cookies. And using cookies, there's some client-side storage that can be used. And the reason why I said it lasts forever is that, if you're private browsing, or if you decide you don't want the next person to use your computer, you don't want them to see what sites you've been on, you might delete your cookies and your browsing history, right? And that gets rid of this storage. But for the most part, sessions are used for things that you want to last for a long time, and Flash is used for just the next HTTP request. Another big use of the session, which you'll probably see later, is for authentication. Usually when you authenticate something, you want to the user enters a username and password, and then you store something in the session that says this is an authenticated user, here's the authentication key, and now for every other request, you know which user that is. I also want to note that there are some alternatives to where you store the session. You can actually store it in your database table. You can also store it in a NoSQL storage system, which I think Armando talked about early on. Rails provides this separate abstraction for essentially key value storage. And NoSQL is a great place to store something like that because there's no schema required.